Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT and Firefly Recovery. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Episodes like this are made possible by Firefly, the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. This episode is powered by Dr. Ray Gorman, founder of Engage Movement. Learn how to boost your income without relying on sessions. Get a free training on the blended practice model by following at Ray Gorman DPT on Instagram. Joining me on the podcast today is Dan Taylor. Dan is an absolute legend in the sports science space, having worked in collegiate sport, professional sport, and now at the Joe Gibbs High Performance Institute. Dan and I are going to dive into the setup and what it takes to construct a high-level high-performance lab. We go through considerations for building a team, choosing equipment, and beyond. This was a great episode, and I really appreciate Dan's time. Enjoy. Dan, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. For people who aren't familiar with you and all the incredible work that you're doing, especially in the sports science and performance space lately, would you mind filling in a little bit about who you are and all the great things you've got going on?
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate the opportunity to come and chat on the podcast. So thank you for that. Yeah, so my name is Dan Taylor. I work at Joe Gibbs Human Performance Institute, which is a very unique place. It's essentially a biomechanics lab that's attached to the Joe Gibbs Racing NASCAR team. My background, before I get into that, is very much in the team space, predominantly basketball, both collegiate and in the NBA. Originally in strength and conditioning, with a lot of sports science sort of splintered in. When I ended up in the NBA with the Hornets here in Charlotte, it was really all sports science. And so my background is very much applied, very much practitioner based and sort of athlete facing. So I moved into this role a year ago, which is in the sort of like business development and partnership side of things. And the idea, I think, there is to help the scientists and the people who are doing the sort of building of this amazing lab and this amazing machine and these novel technologies, kind of keep it steered towards the practical side of it and making sure it is, to move the industry forwards, but also to, keep it about winning games and sort of helping athletes and helping coaches. So what happens on the inside of it, briefly, because it is a long story, as you know, is it was originally conceptualized to support the pit crew at Joe Gibbs Racing. Support in terms of helping identify new pit crew members, because all NASCAR pit crew members come from different sports, former football, former soccer, former basketball. And there needs to be, or needed, excuse me, to be a better understanding of where they would fit on a pit crew, because none of these athletes have ever pitted a car before. So some of it was about understanding as a blueprint, a biomechanical blueprint, these new athletes coming in. And I guess before that, to sort of understand what the current best crop of jackman tire people and so on look like from, again, from a biomechanical perspective. So that's its origin, that's its roots. But what ended up happening along the way, as you and I talked about when we first met, is when it was created from a blueprint perspective, from a sort of an architectural design perspective, they realized that Joe Gibbs, if you can drive a car in this thing and assess a full live pit stop, which is what it's set up for. And I'm sure you and I will talk about technologies and so on as we move along. But if you can drive a car in this thing, you can do anything. So the lab itself is basically outfitted with interchangeable floorings. So it has concrete as its base flooring, which is for motorsports, for NASCAR. It currently has a sort of a jigsaw puzzle style wood flooring, which is for hardcore sports. Same thing to be able to assess volleyball, basketball, and any of the sort of hard court sports. And we've just started to build and manufacture our turf solution. And so all grass and turf sports will be able to do the same thing. So the kind of work that's being done obviously is super novel. It's around multiple sports, multiple teams, multiple individuals. And really what separates it, and again, we'll obviously talk about this, is it's a biomechanics lab, except by name, except you can play your sport in it up to a certain extent. So instead of just having to go to a lab and have a couple of force plates and do sort of more typical biomechanical assessments, jumping, hopping, and skipping, which is fine, up to a point, you just play. And then the insights that we are starting to gather come from actual in-game scenarios, which is incredibly unique. And it's just not really being done anywhere else to the level we can do it at. So I'll stop there because obviously there's all kind of rabbit holes to go down.
Oh, 100%. And just to add a little bit to the level that you're able to do it at, from what I remember, I think you said you're able to get like 20 terabytes of data
Yeah,
roughly in an hour, which is just insane to stop and think about just how many data points you're able
yeah,
to gather on athletes, again, in their natural environment, doing the things that they do in sport that way. That comes up in a lot of podcast episodes we do. We actually just touched on that on Monday's episode from when we're recording this with Ryan Talbot, in the sense that the view motion software they have allows you to actually assess the athlete in their natural environment
yeah,
doing natural athletic things, as opposed to confining them again to a lab setting or to even a clinic setting, even if it's well outfitted and you've got, force plates, you've got, your little two lead surface EMG and so on that way. It's
yeah,
nothing compared to the kind of assessments that you're able to get in a lab like this. And I think the other thing that really I see as exciting from this whole thing as well is a lot of us, myself included, are still trying to figure out what the data we get in our own little clinical settings, if you will, is actually telling us and meaning to
yeah,
us. And a lot of us kind of have debates about like this metric versus that metric, or, if someone somehow passes all these different tests, Cincinnati hop, your force plate assessments, your EMG, your dynamometer, all these different things, and goes back to sport and there's still issues and it doesn't feel right, it doesn't look right, then it's a matter of, well, where do we go from here? We've checked all of our boxes, we've assessed everything that we
yeah.
could, but again, it's all in that isolated lab controlled type setting, if you will. It's not necessarily in the chaotic situations that occur in sport that way. And I think, just thinking about that control to chaos continuum for a minute, a lot of PTs and practitioners and trainers implement that in their rehab with great success from an intervention standpoint. But I also think our sports science element needs to follow something like that as well, because again, we're doing a lot of highly controlled assessments
Mhm.
instead of highly chaotic assessments, which, in my opinion, since sport is so chaotic, we need to find a way to assess the chaos that occurs. And you're able to do that in the lab perfectly that way, because you have literally the court and surface that these athletes are going to play on. And on top of that, you have so much data coming in that there's literally nothing to guess about. I mean, activation level, force into the ground, ball tracking, overall movement analysis from the
Yeah.
ridiculous amount of cameras you have there. Like it just leaves nothing to chance. And I'm a huge fan of that.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think it's. I mean, there's a few things you've hit upon, which I, are the core of what we do. But obviously, it's kind of where you and I kind of connected and kind of clicked a little bit. Is I think first of all the sort of technologies and things of that nature that win and that move these things forward, and this is true sort of generationally as these things have come out, are the ones that get you closer and closer to playing or to I think you use the natural movement or whatever the phrase you use. They're also the less and less invasive ones. Those are the ones that if you look back, 20 years ago, the smaller, faster, quicker ones are the ones, including look at Apple Watches and things like that. They're the ones that have been the most successful, and the sort of larger, clunkier ones that may have produced really good, meaningful data at the time just aren't around anymore. They're just not. And then exactly to your point and to the point of our lab is that you have to get closer and closer to playing, which again is the chaos that you're describing. And I think to give us all credit, it's been really, really hard to do that. I mean, I remember even, as a strength and conditioning practitioner working with some end stage rehab return to play when it's sort of been cleared, but not really fully cleared to play, and working closely with athletic trainers is trying to, come up with, all kinds of different solutions where you're, having them do reactive timing drills, or, one thing I used to do with a much smaller budget was, throw playing cards and just have them respond to kind of playing cards in time and space. So just something unique to try and get the stimulus of reactivity and the stimulus exactly of the chaos that you described. But we just haven't been able to do it. And I think that, we're obviously a sort of like, cutting edge version of this, but it is coming in different ways, which is great. What it does do, to your kind of latter point, though, is it produces massive amounts of data. It also produces maybe not new types of data, although it's large, but it creates this need of more novel, different, unique mathematical capabilities. And so, for people who deal with data and data scientists in the truest sense, it's kind of their job and their discipline. They can't use sort of traditional statistical methodologies, of which I won't speak on too much because it's not my background. You have to kind of lead towards different things because it's just so much data. It can be noisy. Again, it comes in ways that we're just not used to because we've never tested it before. So you have once again, these multidisciplinary scenarios where you have excellent, medical practitioners like yourself who are looking for solutions and have ideas and ways of driving it. Then you have, people who are on the sports science side who are maybe facilitating the collection of this data. But then you have the data science people who are having to like probe through all this crazy data. And then what that leads to is a lot of the AI kind of solutions and machine learning and deep learning and these type of solutions, which is something that we're all sort of aware of in today's world, but maybe don't know how to get our hands around. So it has the potential to be extremely messy, but it also has the potential to change the sort of landscape as we know it. So if we can all work together, practitioners, scientists, data people, whatever, as closely as possible, I think it's an incredibly exciting time. And I'm just fortunate to be at the sort of cutting edge of it in the institute where we have all of these disciplines in-house and we get to meet, cool and brilliant people like yourself.
Yeah, and I think that point of having the team around it is one of the key pieces to the success of the program that
Yeah.
way. I see a lot of individuals attempt to build out and implement high performance models different places, but they don't complete the team, or maybe there's something within the team model itself that just doesn't work like they expect it will. Maybe there's clashing of personalities, or it's not the right people, or whatever it is that way, or maybe the AI algorithm is coded incorrectly, whatever it is. There's a lot
Yeah.
of little hiccups and nuances that can pop up in that kind of model, if you will. I think the true success is not just dictated by the overall equipment that you use, which is obviously a key part of it. If your equipment's giving you bad readings or bad
Right.
information, I remember there was one sports science lab that I was talking with that they finished construction, they put everything in, started to use their force plates, and they were getting the strangest readings ever. Turned out the ground underneath the lab wasn't actually leveled, and they
Oh
then
boy.
had to lift everything up and redo it, which obviously huge cost, but also, now you've got to delay your projects. You have
Yeah.
to look back at the readings that you already had and basically invalidate everything that you already collected and so on that way. So it's one of those things that I think building that high performance team and high performance model from a tech side is really something that has to be done methodically and calculated. It's not just to throw it together overnight. It's not just pump the prompt into Chat GPT and it'll
Mhm.
tell you everything you need to do. It's really a long, slow process of making sure all the pieces fit together from the people to the tech and so on that way. In your own experience, what has kind of been the success to building that high performance team and high performance model, if you will?
Yeah, no, all of that is really well stated. I think honestly, and this is, I think, true of any sort of endeavor when you're mixing, disciplines, personalities, and people who come at the work from different perspectives, is just low ego, high respect. I think if you hire people, which obviously is tricky, and that's its own podcast about hiring and sort of that managing people, but if you hire people who, competent professionals and domain experts but have a good level of humility and keep their ego, keep their confidence in their work and what they do high, but keep the ego in check and keep it low. Because there's enough egos in this business. You don't need everyone else's crowd in the room up. You don't need that. So keep your ego low and try and keep your team's ego low. And then the respect you have for each member of your group and what they do high. It's usually a great place to start because I'm the least technical person in our group, and I have a level of technical ability, but not to the extremities of people I work with. But they all have a high level of respect for me because I've applied science, technology, and whatever in very, dynamic and in fast-paced and high level places. And so there's a high level of respect for sort of who I am and what I do. And they've kept their egos in the fact that I don't really fully understand how they do what they're doing. I understand what they're doing, but they're keeping their egos in check and like letting me learn with them, which is wonderful. And then the same thing too is, I've worked in the NBA, but I don't wear that on my sleeve. I don't walk around this, group of incredibly talented and successful academic, people who are coming from the research world and sort of like floss around with that. So I keep my ego in check and I keep my respect for the secrets that they're unlocking at a high level. So I think this is sort of a truism for any kind of group you put together. But if you can have low ego, high respect, it's the best place to start because there is going to be some contentious moments because all of this stuff, and you laid it out really well in the way you explained it, just in general, which is almost like explaining our world that I work in right now, is it's really, really hard. These are very complicated problems. These are, whether it's again the technology, the hardware, the software, the melding of personalities, and it's going to take all of us to answer them. So nobody can say that their one discipline is the one discipline that will sort of win the day. It's a lie. It's going to be all of us, and that's across the industry, but within my building. And so I think that there are moments when the hardware people will win that day because they're the ones creating the solution of the moment. But then the software people have to build the tool that is ingesting the hardware's information. And the biomechanist group are the ones that are going to then have to be able to, create reports and understandings from the hardware and the software. And then you're going to have, applied practitioners like myself that then will take the information and make it applicable to coaches and athletes. So we all have to do it together. But again, I think the easiest way to describe it is low ego, high respect. And I think that goes a long way and it keeps you tight and close and it gets you through the contentious moments because even if it was an ugly meeting at the whiteboard when you're hashing something technical out, you still have a lot of love and respect for the people that you're having that argument, for want of a better term, with. And I think that that's what drives it forward in the end of it.
Oh, 100%. I love that. I completely agree. And it's one of those things as well that low ego, high respect goes beyond just the team that you're
Yeah.
building for your own performance. But I'll even say it goes as far into impacting the types of equipment that I tend to outfit my space with. There's so
Yeah.
many great companies out there and that sort of thing, but I have a bias and tendency to spend my money towards the businesses and companies that I can connect with someone personally with, but
Yeah.
also have that low ego, high respect model. When people start speaking in absolutes and they start telling me that their tech is the greatest thing since sliced bread and it solves every single problem and you don't even have to do half the work because they're just going to do it for you and yada yada yada. When they start speaking in absolutes and start making some pretty crazy outlandish claims, that's when I start to kind of step back and guard up a little bit. And then on top of that as well, again, when they don't have that kind of individual respect or individual connection piece, I also kind of tap out a little bit. So I think if you follow that model of low ego, high respect, you're not only going to surround yourself with the right individuals from a team standpoint, but you're also going to naturally surround yourself with the tech that's, best for you that way because half the time, most of us don't know everything. So if we don't know it all and we have questions, we need to have that relation with someone who can help us out. Or, the tech's only good until it stops working. And,
Yeah.
I don't have someone in my own little setting here that I can call because, they can fix force plates. It's like I have to call, the company themselves that way. So having those relations kind of built up makes the whole system run more smoothly. And I think, again, these are little minute details, but if you're very serious about building out a legitimate, robust sports science system, if you will, that way. These are the kinds of things that you need to consider that way. On top of that, though, as I mentioned, there's so much tech out there from force plates to EMG and so on that way. And obviously, the personal element is one of the big things for me. Is there anything else that you might look at as far as understanding what equipment you might need to put in a kind of lab type setting, if you will, things that weigh a little bit more on your kind of radar than others, or any unique things that you have in your lab now that you're like, hey, I've never had this anywhere else, or I've never seen this anywhere else?
Yeah, no, that's a great, all of that great stated, or well stated and great points. I think that the first part of that is if you just labs in general, or high performance systems, and you're including technologies or whatever it might be, is you have to start with the questions you're trying to answer. And that's mistakes that I made, younger versions of me with an open budget, coming from a place where I didn't have a budget and then suddenly getting one, is just getting things to get things because it's cool and you should have them. And I think if you don't know what questions you're trying to answer, or even the questions that the franchise or the school or the client or the athlete need answered, that's the best place to start, is because then you can go, well, these are the questions that are important. And then, like you said, let me go to my sort of Rolodex of industry relationships to go and find the technologies that answer those questions. And then using my filter that we just talked about of the companies that I know care and have high respect, low ego, and humility, or whatever your thing is, those are the ones I'm now going to add into the puzzle, because you'll better equip yourself to answer those questions. You will have the type of equipment that you believe in, is robust and you're comfortable with, and the relations behind those equipments will help you solve some of the issues that may come up as you start to build the system out. So always start with the questions, and I think that's something that we constantly are having to keep in check with our lab, because it's we're trying to answer questions that the industry's had for a while, but we're also doing things that are so new that we're sort of inventing our own questions along the way. So that's this sort of like interesting sort of edge to kind of walk and not fall over too much. In answer to your question about things that are super novel I haven't seen before, not really. It's the thing that's sort of magical about where I work is our force plates, of which we have 87 subterranean, are Burtec force plates. Incredible in-ground force plate manufacturer, great company, very well respected, definitely fall on the lines of the sort of ethos that you and I just talked about. But there's never been 87 in one place together. So it's not the force plate or the technology or the company, it's the sort of gross amount of them. The sort of optical tracking engines and the motion capture cameras, none of them I haven't seen before or been around before. I'm more privy to the sort of like behind the scenes technical part of it, because the group I work with is so technical that they pull that stuff apart and put it together again. We use polar heart rate, we use Kinexon, we work with NOAA, which is a pole tracking technology. All of these technologies, again, I was sort of aware of, had utilized in the past, and people who listen to this will have heard. Dell Sys EMG is another one that we have. Not a lot of that in my background, but I've seen and heard about it. What makes it magical is the amount of it, to your point, but the fact that everything is being integrated together. And that's where it gets tricky. So instead of having 10 different dashboards and 6 different Excel spreadsheets, and you're trying to take from one to the other, or building your own sort of spreadsheet, all that stuff, all of this has been designed in a pipeline in the back end, so to speak, from a software perspective, where everything speaks to each other. It's all integrated together and it's all automated, which is one of the more unique things about our environment is, and what I mean by that is that as soon as you walk on the floor, it just basically turns on and goes. So every single piece of technology that we have is all working synchronously with each other. So for the data group then to pull events like 3-point shots, for example, or whatever it is that we're sort of looking at, or some specific thing that happened with the Jackman in the picker analysis, whatever it might be, it's all automated, so we can just take those singular events, those 3-point shots, and look at the 5 to 8 second clips surrounding it, and every single data source from every single one of these technologies that I just referenced. In the 8 seconds, we can look at what happened, and then from a research perspective, from an insights perspective, from an understandings perspective, that is incredibly unique, and I've never been around that before. So it's not necessarily, again, the sort of technology. It's the utilization and the synchronized nature of the technology that I've never seen before on the level and scale that we're working at.
Quick break, because if you're a rehab professional sick of burnout, this could be your answer. Engage Movement's blended practice model is a proven system built by Dr. Ray Gorman. a PT who walked away from the 55-hour-a-week grind and built a blended practice model that doubled his income while working less than 25 hours a week, and he didn't have to rely on the traditional way of selling sessions to do so. It's all about blending remote and in-person services, stacking monthly recurring revenue, and building a business that finally supports your life, not the other way around. This model isn't just theory. Real providers, including myself, are creating lives of freedom and flexibility without being tied to their schedule. And as a listener, you get free access to the complete training. DM my name, Dan, to @RayGormanDPT on Instagram and receive your free breakdown on the model. I love everything about that you just mentioned there, Dan. I mean, just to kind of run it back, starting with the end in mind is one of the things that I've noticed strength coaches in particular really excel at. But
Yeah.
some of us, especially on the PT space and a little bit on the sports science piece, we get so kind of caught up in the process sometimes that we forget what we're working towards. So I
Yeah.
love that emphasis on beginning with the end in mind, because as you mentioned, there's so many data points. There's so
Yeah.
much that you're going to collect. If you don't know what you're working towards and what you're trying to figure out and answer, then all of that is just aimless. You're just throwing stuff against the wall, hoping something starts to stick. I think
Yeah.
ultimately you have to know, if nothing else, what are you looking at and what are you working towards? The more you have that side of things figured out, the more your data is going to make sense and the more guided you can be in your overall process as well. Because as you mentioned, it's not just the data and equipment that you have, but the actual process of putting the pieces together. It's a puzzle at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And in your case, your puzzle, all the pieces fit together beautifully. I've been in cases and I have cases now on my own end where I wish my own tech talked to each other a little bit more. As you
Yeah.
mentioned, the synchronization of data. I would love it if my EMG and my force plates and everything would just sync up and align perfectly. So then I know actually, hey, what is this muscle doing when we do this? And so on that way. But a lot of times that's not the case for us. So the fact
Yeah.
that you're able to align it where it syncs up automatically gives you this additional insight from a data standpoint that way that a lot of us don't have. But again, if you're at a university setting or something along those lines and you're looking to build out a legit sports science lab, having the ability and building it out on the front end makes all your back end work easier when all of those things align automatically and they all talk to each other. And again, it becomes this game of a lot of different data, but now again, you're leaving nothing to chance. I think a lot of times we only look at one piece. We only look at the force. We only look at the muscle activity.
Yeah.
We only look at the camera. When in reality, it's the combination of all of those things coming together that gives us the whole picture, not the parts, but the actual whole. The other piece I really want to go back to for a second is just the overall quantity of things that you have. You mentioned the force plates being like 87 force plates in the ground, and I think potential to expand up to 100,
Yeah.
depending on the setup that you have that way. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to test my memory here, but 36 lead EMG, surface EMG, or 32 lead surface EMG,
I think
in
it's, yeah, something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
in addition to what, like 36 cameras or something like
Yeah,
that.
I think it might be 50 now, but I know at one point it's 48 cameras, 24 at each end of the facility, depending on what we're doing. Yeah, yeah,
It,
yeah. So
it's an absurd amount of stuff, and it's one
yeah,
of those things that while we can try to replicate this in settings like my own kind of PT office, if you will, we can't come close to that. So
right.
understanding the difference of the readings that you're getting with your single set of force plates and your single camera system, which again, it's great to have that tool, but ultimately it doesn't hold up to the same standard of something like your lab that way. I think it kind of enters that conversation of, are we getting enough data to actually draw the conclusions that we are from the tech that we have? The tech
Yeah,
is great. The companies are great. I'm not knocking any of them, but is it enough? Or do we actually need more to make the kind of assumptions and conclusions that we're making based on the tech that we have that way? And I think you and I might have talked about this in the past as well. Will the future of your force plates in the clinic, will it be a actual legitimate research tool, or will it be more of a athlete screening and load monitoring
yeah.
assessment tool, if you will?
Yeah, no, I mean It's really, really interesting, and I think it gets upsetting and unsettling for equipment companies and whatever. And so I don't by any means want to talk about humility and kind of respect and all that stuff. I think that there's a place for all of this. I think some technologies and some companies just win because they're better, whatever it might be. The timing of it's better, their equipment's better, their software's better, whatever. I mean, that's its own sort of discussion in sort of the technological world and the history of it. But I do think there's a place for everything. I do know that if you talk to people who work in the true research, research labs, you name it, kind of like globally in terms of institutions. Most of them do not use above ground commercial grade force plates. Almost all, if not the entire of them, use some type of subterranean. I use Burtec because it's ours, but the Burtec and its competitors force plates. So they don't necessarily use that anyway. Now, I'm not saying you can't do research on commercial ones, but the ones that sort of like pump out the research that's seminal works or is thought of at a different level already don't necessarily use that technology. So there is a piece of that going on anyway. It's also, depending on the type of research you're doing, because you can't run across plates that are above ground. You can, but it changes the mechanics of how you shoot if you put one of them on a three-point line. And there's some interesting research papers that have done all that, but it goes back to what you and I were saying at the beginning. It starts to manufacture how you play the game as opposed to just assessing the game itself. And so the only way you can do that is obviously being subterranean. But then if you don't have a big group of them and you're sort of requiring where people's feet fall, you're sort of again manufacturing how the place can be. And this goes back to what you were saying earlier a little bit too, and even what you mentioned before about do we have enough information, how we're collecting information, and is about sort of flying blindly or having preconceived notions of where we're going with rehab or where we're going with strength and conditioning practices because we never fully knew the end game because the end game is the game and we've never been able to assess the game. So you're using models and concepts and ideas that have been successful in the past with either a research that has been done that we agree and appreciate or align with, or case studies from our own clinics or our own S&C world. And I was there too. So this isn't me preaching. This is the kind of world that we've been in. And therefore, there's been nothing wrong with that. But to the point that you made, and this again, I'm working in, is we're trying to understand what actually happens in that game. So one of the reasons that we have this ridiculous amount of cameras and this ridiculous amount of force plates is nobody really knows what is the minimum best amount and the positions of force plates and cameras for NASCAR pit crews, for basketball, for lacrosse. You pick it. We don't know because it's never been done before. So we were fortunate enough as we were building the lab out to just go, we're going to put as much as possible of all these different types of equipment manufacturers, all these different technologies, again, that we respect and believe in. And to try and understand to then better equip smaller clinics and better equip basketball teams as they're building their practice facilities, say how many cameras is necessary to understand the correct amount of actions in basketball that are relative to whatever we're trying to study, shooting or whatever it might be. So we're trying to answer some of those questions. It's 12 in basketball around one hoop. I actually don't know the correct amount for NASCAR because it's something that we're trying to understand. So we're trying to create better insights from the technology. But to your point, because we don't know the right amount of technology, we're trying to help answer that question for people and say, look, if you're going to do this in this environment, and this is going to be a couple of years worth of work, this is the right amount of cameras in these kind of areas to better understand your sport or your demographic of choice. So it's a lot. And again, I kind of say this stuff a little bit blasé, and I try and catch myself, 87 force plates, 40 cameras, all this different stuff. It's very, very difficult. And there's some brilliant people I work with upstairs and that we've also sort of had conversations with across the industry to help answer these questions. So it goes back to we can't do this alone. It's going to take all of us. And I like what you said too, and I've said this in the past as well, is that any group, including us, that says we have all of the answers are lying. Speaking in absolutes is a foolish way to go about high performance process. It's also just an outright lie because humans are so unique and complicated. And then you put us in unique and complicated environments. So it's impossible to have all the answers in one solution. So again, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take a lot of sort of insight. It's going to take an openness across the industry to say, we're not necessarily eradicating other people's things. We're ingesting and informing them so we can all be more successful and better equip the groups that we're working with the right answers and improving technologies along the way and so on and so forth. So again, I think it's a big group effort. And it's going to take some time because, just because you and I are saying, oh, well, we can assess in-play movement. Sure, that's a massive amount of data in a way that's never been done before. So we have to keep ourselves in check and make sure that we're doing things the correct way and constantly, providing the right insights and sort of course correcting along the way because it is so much data in a way that's never been done before as well. So we are in that camp too.
Exactly. It's ever evolving. And at the end of the day, you have to be so specific with the data that you collect when you're trying to take something as specific that you're getting from an assessment and measurement standpoint, and then
Yeah,
applying it to the broader spectrum of basketball, of NASCAR, of insert sport. I think the other piece that makes it exceptionally complicated as well is just the overall individual difference from one person to the next, right? Like in a setting like you have, you could, in theory, have a whole team run in there and then build data points off of, 50 different individuals in one shot. That's great. However, those 50 individuals are all different and unique. Five of them, let's say, are in return to sport phase following an injury. Another five have an acute injury. 20 of them have a history of another chronic injury. And of those 50, there's actually only 20 that are perfectly healthy, never been injured. So now
yeah,
I've just limited my sample size as far as conclusions I can make to the entire broad spectrum of sport to about 40%, hypothetical
yeah,
numbers here, but significantly smaller amount. And as a result, my data doesn't have the same weight to it, if you will. And
yeah,
then you start the conversation around, oh, shoot, well, now I need data on, late stage ACL in lacrosse, late stage ACL in basketball. I need Achilles data in basketball. But then again, you start to peel back the layers and get into all these very minute differences between individuals, whether it's genetic factors or, body composition, height and weight, different things, all these different variables that, again, for the longest time, I don't think any of us really thought about. And now we're
right.
realizing, hey, look, all these complicated things might play into this performance puzzle that we see. Again, you realize, to your point, we don't have it all figured out. We're probably never going to have it all figured out, but we're going to get closer and closer to it every single day. And on top of that, because this is such an evolving space, as you mentioned before, on the low ego side of things, like we have to be willing to admit the fact that what we did 6 months ago was wrong. What we did a year ago was wrong. What we did 2 years
Yeah,
ago was wrong because of how much we're learning at the pace that we're learning it at.
yeah.
We've never been able to get this much data and process this much data and draw conclusions on this much data before, just with the evolutions in the technology space and the lab space and so on that way. So, in order to, again, move forward and advance, we have to be able to kind of evolve from those past things that we always did. I'm not saying abandon them entirely, right?
No,
Take ACL return to sport. I'm not abandoning the hop testing. I'm not abandoning the isometric testing by any means. I'm still doing it, but I've added other elements as adjuncts to it to kind of take it a step further. It's not as much as reinventing the wheel every time, but maybe figuring out how we can make the wheel turn a little bit more smooth as we move through this
mm.
process.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. That's again really well stated, and I think that is the truth of it too. Is that I mean, I think for the first thing that I thought about as you were saying that is that this whole thing about acknowledging and being open to the fact that what you did 6 months ago, a year ago was well, not maybe not wrong, but just wasn't as good as it could be. That should be exciting. It's that kind of growth mindset versus fixed mindset, not because you feel like you did something wrong, because that's if you are a conscientious practitioner, you did the best job you could with the tools and knowledge you had at the time. And hopefully were effective and that individual, got some level of success in return to their activity from it. Or in strength and conditioning became a little bit stronger, whatever to it. So it doesn't diminish the job you did. It's exciting about what we can do now. So I think you should we should always look at it from that point of view. Like it's thrilling what is coming before us. And again, respecting what was done before. The other thing, like you said, is the things that are good and successful don't usually just go away. They don't. I mean, that's why they're successful. What ends up happening is exactly what you said about making the wheel move better, is it just gets more refined. There will be a few things that do get discarded, just because, with different types of testing, different understanding, it's just found that they're not as productive. You can do it maybe a quicker, faster, smoother way, and that's okay too. I mean, it doesn't mean that that was wrong. I mean, if you look at like medical science in general, like surgical procedures from a century ago changed people's lives, but you just wouldn't do some of them now because compared to what we know now, they're riskier, and you pick the scenario. But it didn't mean that it diminished what happened at the time. It changed the world at that point. But we've moved on and we've changed how we handle certain things, and we have different technologies and ways of like monitoring the body during surgery or whatever. It shows how exciting this all can be, and how fast technology changes things and the integrations of different aspects of it. So again, it doesn't diminish what was done. It should make you proud of what you did, knowing less and still being effective, and it should make you excited about what's coming up. And I have this whole thing, which I've mentioned before in podcasts and different things that I've sort of put out content wise, is this stuff, these sort of like new waves of information are coming anyway. Then you're not stopping them coming. So you need to embrace them. You need to sort of understand how you can integrate them best in your practice. And if you are a leader in the space or want to be the first one to sort of like get your hands on them. Maybe don't use it initially, but try and understand them and then help shape the world with these things. But they're coming either way. They'll just run you over. So you should be excited about it. It shouldn't diminish what you've done in the past. And it's what makes this industry sort of exciting and constantly refreshing. If you look at it that way, would be my take on that.
100%. I mean, as you mentioned, it's coming, and if you don't keep up to pace with it, it runs you over. It's
Yeah.
one of those things that it's impacting everything from clinical practice to sports science to strength and conditioning and beyond that way, because that's the other piece of all of this is once you get the data, you understand what it means, then you actually have to do something about it,
Yeah.
and you have action that follows up that way. And understanding that, the process of actually implementing action following all of these assessments on all of these different screens and just data gathering on specific athletes or groups of athletes, if you will, the action piece should be significantly more streamlined and more effective now, which is something we need because everyone I've talked to is feeling the same pressure that I have in that now more than ever, people want results. They want them quickly. They want them as
Yeah.
fast as possible. They're not willing to wait. 9 to 12 months for ACL rehab is no longer sufficient. We need to find a way to do it in 7 to 8, and we need the outcomes to be just as good, right? It's always that constant push and pressure and challenging the status quo. And some of that I think is good. Some of that I think is not as good. But instead of thinking about things in terms of good and bad, let's instead look at the opportunities that they present within themselves, right? Again, going back to beginning with the end in mind, if our goal is to take something hypothetically like ACL rehab and find a way to get it done 2 months quicker while still producing the same outcomes, yeah, there's going to be pushback. There's going to be people that challenge it. But by the same token, it's like, hey, this has never been done before. So even if I come up short, we end up in the same place we are. But if we succeed, hey, now we're on to something, we crack the code and we move on from there. So I think that this expedites that whole action side and the follow-up side, if you will. It eliminates a lot of the guesswork that comes with it as well, because as you mentioned before on the low ego side, people have a tendency to disagree sometimes. Even if it's something as simple as myself and some of the other clinicians or even students that I've had in the past that I've kind of like taught my framework for viewing things and assessing things, we still come to different conclusions on the same person, watching them do the same thing from the same angles. So I can't necessarily trust that in-person judgment all the time. I need that element of it. I need that coach's eye element. I don't think anything is ever going to replace that, but it needs to be balanced with something objective that I can't dispute, right? Hey, when they're sprinting, this is the knee flexion angle they get at left versus right. This is the ankle angles that they get left versus right. This is the hip extension they get left versus right. Things that I can't necessarily argue with or dispute in order to guide my process from there. So I think understanding the power that this has, the actionable piece that it has, and then ultimately the framework that you build around it. And I think that's the other piece I want to hit on real quick as well is you've got all this built out, you've got your action step, and that's the last thing is you've just got to put your plan into action. Make sure that plan and the framework that you implement is just as robust as the team that you built and the tech that you put together in order to get yourself there. A lot of times I see people rush the team. They get really good assessments and really good measurements, and then they get to the action step and it's the same 3 by 10 BS that you could get at any PT clinic.
Yeah.
Now, ChatGPT could put together a better program. And it's like, why did we do all of this
Yeah.
if we're not actually going to do anything about it or with it? So understanding that once you get to that actual implementation standpoint, have a good framework as far as, hey, if these things popped up, here's what we have to do about them. But also make sure that just like you refine that team framework and that science framework, you also refine your intervention framework as well. And you're constantly challenging yourself, hey, why did I pick this exercise? Why did I pick
Yeah.
this 7 rep count? What could I do different? What could I do better next time? But also don't change everything from one session to the next. I like to change one variable at a time because otherwise I'm not going to know what thing made the difference. So really looking at that intervention piece, almost like the case studies that you read about, in the white papers that way,
Mhm.
understanding control the controllables, change small things, but constantly challenge what you know and constantly look for new ways to do things.
Yeah, no, that's great too, and I think I mean you are hitting the crux of all this stuff because if you build a multi-million-dollar lab, and you can do all these fancy things that I'm saying, or you work in the NBA, or you work in clinics or whatever, it actually doesn't matter at all. Now, if you're producing research and your whole point is to just produce research papers, so the outcome of that is a research paper, and it's actionable in as much as it's actioning into the sort of like knowledge of the space. That's its own thing. But if you're doing it to aid people, aid teams, whatever it might be, it does not matter if it's not turned into action. So you're 100% correct. And I do think, and I like what you said before that about how that's where the art comes in. The artfulness of this is being able to take complicated knowledge or complicated findings or cross-disciplinary understandings and artfully putting it into a form that you can apply. Or you can bring to a coach or a patient or a whatever and articulate to them, either just literally articulate or articulate through a training program or whatever, to create the interventions. And I think that is where, people who get concerned about being replaced or, where does the art and science fall into it? It's always going to be present. It forever and ever will be, because it's just the nature of it. And so that is important to remember. I will also say, though, that that artful element is a skill. It's just, the ability to apply something is a skill, and it's just as important, although in a different way, to being a gifted data scientist as being a gifted, whatever it might be, on the more technical side, is that if your need is to apply this and you don't have these great interpreters, I call them, that can take all of that and apply it into a space, it becomes a bit of a wasted endeavor because that is, to your point, the be all and end all. If you can be the person to do both, like I can create the hard science technology and I can interpret it, brilliant. But a lot of times it isn't that person. So, as you're building these teams out, like you were saying before, or if you are, a younger professional looking for where you fit in this industry, don't forget that part of it. Like, the great interpreters will always be, and the great artists in this will always be employable and needed because To your point, multiple times through this conversation, the technology is only going to get bigger, better, faster. The data is only going to get bigger, better, faster. The ability to interpret and artfully apply it is going to be critical. And, for example, when I was at Georgia Tech, a couple of jobs ago when I was working with a men's basketball team in the strength and conditioning side of things, I would go up campus and talk to their scientists and the people that were doing brilliant work up there and meet the students. So we would have master students come down and do projects for us, and it was brilliant. Another story, another time, but really, really good experience. But I would constantly tell the sort of professors when they would ask me for feedback, and the students were unbelievable, super brilliant, incredibly talented, going to change the world in their own right. But I would tell them, you have to make sure that you have an applied piece of this in your coursework, because at some point they're going to have to talk to a coach, a key stakeholder. At some point, someone's going to say, how am I going to use this information you're creating? Again, unless they're just heavy on the research track, which a lot of them were. So, yes, to your point, application is the most important part of this. But there needs to be skilled artists that are doing this, and that's something that we can't forget. And it's something that I think, as you're sort of like critically appraising yourself, are you doing enough of that? Is that a skill that you have, the sort of soft skill side of it? If it's not something that you have or you're interested in, do you have the right people on your team that have the ability to do that? Because it's going to be needed and it will fall flat no matter how cool and sexy your tech stack is. It's going to fall flat if you don't have those people. So I love that you identified that and kind of highlighted that early.
100%, Dan. And I feel like you and I could probably talk about this all day long because it's such a fascinating world and a fascinating
Yeah.
topic. And it's one of those things, as you mentioned, we don't have all the answers yet, but I think the more we continue the conversation, the more we continue the work, the closer we get to it that way. But is there anything we missed as we were chatting today or anything else you want to bring up on this conversation around high performance and sports science and the integration of those systems, if you will?
No, I think we hit all the things that I really care about. I mean, I think again, I think to kind of like highlight some of the key points here is that this stuff's coming whether you like it or not. It's very heavily sort of in camera-based technology now, but there'll be other things coming. And I think people, it doesn't matter if you're medical, strength and conditioning, coaching, whatever your thing is, maybe a GM or someone that kind of pays the bills. It's coming, and so an understanding of it is going to be critical. Again, it's the integration of and the actionable outcomes from that are the most important parts of this. And I think we need to keep an eye on that. And so we don't just get so excited with the ability to create data at scale, because that is something that you should be excited about. But what ends up happening with the pendulum swings of our industry is we're going to get super excited about big data and big acquisition. And then we're going to get mad and frustrated because we don't know how to use it. So to your point, it's like be enthusiastic, be thrilled about it, look for the integration of all of these things, but make sure that we're keeping an eye on the prize, and the prize is actionable outcomes, because that is what will change the industry, and it is kind of what's going to change the world in sports and the kind of pieces around it as we know it.
Completely agree. I love that, Dan. For people who want to find out more about you that way online and that sort of thing, where can they find you all at?
For the lab itself and for the group I work with, again, it's Joe Gibbs Human Performance Institute, so JGHPI.com. Our website gets updated a lot, and it has our kind of like most up-to-date stuff on it. Me personally, I float around on a few social media platforms. DT_worldwide with the O of worldwide as a zero is my Instagram handle. I post random thoughts on that, as you know, and then LinkedIn is just Dr. Daniel Taylor, and I'm pretty easy to find on that as well, and kind of easy to get hold of through those things.
Yeah, we got to get you on the TikTok platform next here, Dan.
I kind of have one. I kind of keep it on the low because I use it to edit the videos I put on the other social media platforms that my kids find funny as well. So you can find me randomly on there if you choose to look.
That's awesome. We'll link to all that in the description below too. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there, see everything that Dan and the team at Joe Gibbs are up to. This was awesome. Really appreciate your time today, man.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And one thing I will say is that, definitely credit and kudos to you for doing this, because busy professionals that have a multiple other things going on in their life, companies and work and clients and stuff that are willing to put education and insights out into the world, get my utmost respect, because again, it's something that ties us all together and keeps us moving forward. So thank you for the opportunity. But again, major kudos for being willing to do this with this platform.